Happy Sabbath to everybody. I want to welcome you all to another Med Missionary podcast. Thank you for being here once again. And as you may know, if you've been with us for a while, we've been here since 2020 when this whole this whole health crisis started, and we've been here trying to help people navigate through a lot of the confusion and that type of thing. And as you may remember, we help people with a lot of these issues with health using natural remedies. We want to teach people about doing things through these principles that we've learned in the Bible. And that's how we started our online medical missionary training program. It's at medmissionary.com. So I hope that you'll go there and visit. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Scott Schara, and he's going to share with us his story about what happened to his daughter, Grace, when she was hospitalized in 2019. And so I want to give him as much time to share as possible. So before we start, I'm going to start with a prayer, and I'll pray for Scott as well. Our dear Heavenly Father, as we have this time together, I just pray, Lord, that you would be here. These are very important subjects that we're going to be speaking about. And I just pray that you'd bless Scott, that you'd give him your Holy Spirit, that he'd have wisdom and discretion to speak just the right words. Um, Lord, bless him and bless his family. I just pray for each person listening here today, Lord, that we would hear what it is that we need to hear to see Jesus more clearly. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Joyce.
All right, Scott. So I'm going to let you share, and you can just take it from here.
Well, sounds good. Well, I always would like to start with telling people about my best buddy, Grace. So Grace was when her last day on earth was October 13th of 2021, and she was 19 years old. Her first day on earth was September 22nd, 2002. And so I'm not going to go into how she was created because I'm sure your audience knows that, but I do want to share, I'm going to share a quick picture of her so everybody can see her. Do you see her there, Joyce? Is it on
Yes.
screen? All right. So on the left-hand side, of course, if you're wondering what my hair color used to be, that is no longer a question. So that was when Grace was, she was probably 3 years old then. And my
And you
favorite.
might want to make it a full screen there for you.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Thank you. All right. We'll see if I can do that. How did that work?
Yes, that's much
All
better.
right.
Do you want to make it like presenters screen, or do you want to just leave it that way so you know
Well,
what's
now
there?
you're really challenging me.
It's okay. Whatever
Let me
works for you,
see.
fine.
All right. If this is okay, that'll
That's
help.
fine.
All
That's
right.
fine.
Okay. So then my favorite picture, Grace, is over on the right. And this is the day I stopped killing dandelions in our lawn. So I was one of those lawn Nazis before all of a sudden Grace comes in with this beautiful bouquet for my wife Cindy. I thought, oh my goodness, those things are a gift. They're not a weed. And so Grace made life special. She had Down syndrome, and anybody with Down syndrome is a gift from the Lord. So, how Grace was created, though, was also a gift from the Lord because we had been chasing the American dream. And so we already had 2.1 kids, 1.7 dogs, no cats, all the things that make up the American dream. And in December of, let's see, Grace was born 2002. So in December of 2001, my wife and I were 39 years old, and we thought we're going to let God lead in the baby department. And of course, 5 minutes later, she was pregnant. And 9 months later, Grace came out, and we never tested for anything. So when she came out, I was in the delivery room, and I said to Cindy, I think she has Down syndrome. And it was, so it was fine. I mean, that was a gift. So anyway, the doctors came in after a fairly short period of time. They had a huddle, and then they came in and said, we suspect your daughter has Down syndrome. Do you want to keep her? Yeah, and it's like, what are you talking about? We were in shock that they would have that attitude. So we actually said, what are you talking about? I mean, And we didn't really understand what the attitude towards Down syndrome people was at that time. But they said, we have people waiting in the wings for children such as these. So I don't know what that meant either. For sure, I'm assuming the most positive, which they had people waiting to adopt, but I don't know. I don't know what it meant.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we were shocked by that and just said, we're not interested in that. Strange, coincidence. It's not a coincidence because in God's economy, it's all God's providence. But the hospital that she came into this world in is the same hospital she left the world in.
Wow.
So then I'll just say a couple more things about Grace. Grace taught me more than any other person I've ever learned. She didn't teach me 100% because I'm still a dumb man, but she walked with God, and that is our goal, is to walk with him. And she did it as the only way we can walk with him is as a child. And she had that childlike spirit. It was just wonderful. I
Mm.
taught her my stupid sense of humor, which you won't get a lot of that in this program today, but I taught her how to look at life literally. So if you look at things literally, it's fun. You see certain signs, for example, and they make you laugh. And one of the ones, I have one behind me here. I'll just pull it out so you can see it. But so when Grace she got this sense of humor, so she would see these things. And I'll just pull this one out and see if we can get this on the screen.
You might want to unshare your screen and so that people can see it.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Thank you. All right, so can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
So most everybody's seen this. We've got the bike on top of the stick person, and of course Grace, when she sees that, Dad, look at that sign. And I said, well, what do you think it means? And she said, watch out for falling bikes. And she got that sense of humor, and I enjoyed it. Her and I had a blast. And she was, most people would think Down syndrome people can't do anything, and I thought that at the beginning too. I just thought, well, she's never going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. Well, Grace played violin at my daughter Jessica's wedding. She could read, write, could public speak. She deer hunted with me, and I taught her how to drive a car. So this is a little clip of her driving.
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's the sky is the limit if you look at life that way. And
Mm-hmm.
we do have a give, send, go set up for Grace, because of all the things that we're doing to get this message out. But ultimately the name of the give, send, go is the sky is the limit, and it's because
Mm-hmm.
of Grace showed us the sky is the limit. All right, so we're going to take a look at what's behind the curtain. And I'm going to touch on it today with Grace's story. And assuming that this audience wants to hear more, of course, I'm glad to come back. But we're going to walk through Grace's story because it opens up some things that I was completely blind to. I would have said before I learned about what's really going on in hospitals that I would say I was a conservative businessman with a healthy distrust for the government.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have turned my business over to my men to run because I don't have time anymore. I'm doing this full-time advocacy. We have the first lawsuit in the country to expose the evil behind deaths like this. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and all of this consumes a lot of time. So I'm going to jump into Grace's hospital stay. And so this was during the COVID era. So the COVID era was 39 months long. It started in January of 20. It ended on April 10th of 2023. And in that 39 months, a lot took place. Ultimately, there was an all court push for fear, the propaganda relative to this supposed pandemic. And I'm not going to drill down the supposed word today, but the pandemic itself, there was, the numbers on television, the deaths, the all, the scare tactic. So ultimately, on October 1st of 2021, we were going to go to a wedding, and Grace had a cold. We just thought, well, our civic duty, we better just check and see if she has COVID. So my wife drove into town, bought a home COVID test at Walgreens. We tested Grace, and she tested positive. So we didn't go to the wedding. Instead, we stayed home, and it was just a cold. But since she tested via this test positive, we started a COVID protocol, which included ivermectin, vitamins, and using a oxygen meter on your finger called, the abbreviated name is a pulse ox. So it measures the oxygen saturation in your blood by just putting this little meter on your finger. And that was all part of the protocol that was outlined in frontline COVID critical care doctors protocol. So we were following that, but nothing of it. Well, on the morning of October 6th, Grace's oxygen level dropped to 88%. And at that time, the protocol said, if the number drops below 94%, that's an emergency, and admit yourself to the hospital. So this would be the first take-home message. That is not true. Now that I've done my own research, I see that oxygen drops normally in the 80s with cold and flu. So that is not a thing to be afraid of. Ultimately, I was afraid of it because, last time I checked, you need oxygen to breathe. So then that number drops. The people who now we've replaced one group of people, the government not trusting their message to with another group, and still, ultimately, that would be my second take home message is Satan's tool is fear. And I succumbed to that fear. My daughter lost her life because of the fear that I had of COVID. And so then once fear takes over, your critical thinking goes out the window. And the critical thinking I'm talking about specifically is we had no business owning a pulse ox. Why? Because we had no baseline. If I would have been measuring Grace's oxygen saturation every time she had been sick in the past, I would have a baseline. So then I know what to expect with this meter. Instead, I'm following another set of rules that was motivated by fear. And I don't want any.
And maybe
Go ahead.
we could restate it, as a physician, like this was my first time owning a pulse ox too. And I noted things that were alarming, but it was just like, it's not that you didn't have a business. I think it's good to have these things, but it's just, you had to keep in mind that you didn't have a baseline as you were using it.
Correct.
And yeah.
So now we take Grace to ultimately to the emergency room. There was a step in between, but that's kind of a long tangent. And the emergency room physician suggests, let's check Grace into the hospital for 3 or 4 days, put her on oxygen and steroid as kind of a preventative. So I thought, well, that makes sense. And I said, I'll be staying with her. And the nurse that was in the room said, well, you can't. I said, well, what's the reason? And she said, well, we don't allow visitors on the COVID wing. And so then I said, well, I'll be taking Grace home then. So you can see my sense was, Grace she was fine. She wasn't short of breath or anything. It just was all preventative. And so then what happened next is she came in after a couple hours and said, well, we had a meeting and we decided you can stay. So I was with Grace from October 6th until the morning of the 10th. And in between, I'm just going to jump to this slide so people see what's going on. And after Grace died, I ended up in a different hospital 3 days later, and I just about died on October 16th. Well, when I got out, one of the doctors who's a friend of our family got a hold of me, and she said, I think you better get the records, Scott. because this seems real strange what happened to Grace. So I ordered the records on October 31st, so just a couple weeks after Grace died. And as God would have it, we had everything we needed to discern her death on November 3rd. People have waited years to get records, but we got them in 4 days. So then we were able to, the doctor friend and I went through the records and we started to peel back the layers to see what actually happened to Grace. And this is the record that I have up on the screen. This is the you can see the doctor's name is, he was considered, they called him the COVID expert. So he was the COVID expert on the floor that Grace was on. So they had this wing for COVID. And you can see, so this is his first day report. If people are not familiar with doctor's reports, every time they go into a room, they have to write a report. And so Grace was in the hospital 27 days, and in the 7 days, there was 22 doctor's reports. This is one of 22. And so you can see that he had referenced that Grace had Down syndrome. Interestingly, he referenced in one report that Grace, this first report, he referenced that Grace had Down syndrome 4 times. In the 22 reports, Grace's Down syndrome was referenced 36 times. You can see that he referenced that we're Christian. He referenced that we're following the frontline doctors' misinformation campaign. So he called what we're doing, the FLCCC, he was calling it frontline physicians, but it's the same. It isn't technically the same, but that was his reference. And he said that their campaign is misinformation. So you can see there's a bias already. And the main bias I put on the bottom, where he wrote, I think the patient probably would not be here if she has been fully vaccinated. So there is, and this is really the push behind things. We're not going to drill that down today, but there is, the vaccination agenda has been around for about 150 years. And during COVID, the goal to get the shot in everybody's arms was ratcheted up to an all-time high. And when I have peeled back the death numbers, that's when I really see the push especially in the fourth quarter of 2021 was the highest quarter of hospital deaths. And there was a reason for that, which, that's a second episode, but I'll just give you kind of a teaser to that. In January of 21, there was a False Claims Act filed by a lady by the name of Brooke Jackson. And the reason she filed that claim is she worked for Pfizer and found out that Pfizer wasn't doing any testing. So she, in our country, if somebody's defrauding the government, you can become a whistleblower and file a False Claims Act. So she did that in January. So now the government is on notice that this happened, and the government had already admitted that the jab causes myocarditis in May of 21. Remember, Grace died in October of 21. And unbelievably, Pfizer's defense, it's not unbelievably because it's the truth, Pfizer's defense to the lawsuit was they had an other authority agreement with the Department of Defense that required them to produce a prototype, not a vaccine, so that no testing was even required. So I'll just take you a full circle on that case so that people understand what's going on. Instead of the government coming back and supporting the whistleblower, they supported Pfizer and filed a motion in support of Pfizer that said, yeah, Pfizer's telling the truth. This was not a vaccine, and they filed that in October of 22. Well, that case right now is up for dismissal on May 1st. The federal judge, it's God's providence again. One of the attorneys for the Brooke Jackson case happens to also be one of our attorneys. So I have like a front row seat to this case. And the federal judge wants to dismiss the case on May 1st because if this case gets out to the public, here's the theory for dismissal. If this case gets out to the public will lose confidence in the federal government's management of healthcare, which of course we should lose confidence when the government is telling us something is safe and effective, and they're lying about it. So, of course, that's when you should lose confidence. All right, so now we're going back to Grace's story.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in the hospital from the 6th until the morning of the 10th. I was taken out by an armed guard on the 10th. And the nurse came in, the head nurse came in at 7 o'clock in the morning on the 10th and said, "You need to leave immediately." I said, "Well, what's the reason?" And she said, "You've been," first, she said, "the last 3 shifts of nurses don't want you in the room. Second, you've been shutting off the alarms at night." And I'll come back to the first one in a moment, Joyce, but the relative to the second one, I defended myself. I said, because the nursing staff taught me how to shut off the non-essential alarms, because it often takes 20 or 30 minutes for them to come in the room, and Grace needs her sleep. And then the third thing she said is, "We suspect you have COVID." And that's laughable, because they told me I'm going to get COVID by being in the room with Grace. And of course I had COVID. I already had, whatever COVID was, I assumed I had it because I had a fever and I tested positive for COVID. So I was just treating myself in the room. Anyway, going back to the first one, what was going on is I was advocating for my daughter. And, my main take home message after the other ones I mentioned, so don't have fear is the main one, but, if you're going to be prepared for a hospital stay today, it is absolutely essential that you have an advocate. And the advocate has to be awake to what I'm talking about. They're not there to hold your hand and keep you company. They're there to make sure that you get informed consent relative to your treatment. Informed consent means that, just like it sounds, you get informed and then you give your consent. And informed consent is really the key right that has been taken away in the hospital setting. They just go, and sometimes they tell you what they did afterward. And that's one of our claims in our lawsuit, is lack of informed consent, because of what I'm going to show you relative to Grace's last day. I mean, we had no idea. Okay, so then, an example I'll give you as to why she said the last 3 shifts of nurses don't want you in the room. On October 9th, so this is the morning before I was taken out, Grace wanted to eat. She, at this point, already had a BiPAP mask on, so she couldn't tell me she wanted to eat. So she's so cute. She knew sign language. Well, I don't know sign language. So I just removed the BiPAP, and she said, "Dad, can you order food?" Yeah, so I ordered food. I start feeding her. The nurse came running in and said, "You can't do that." I said, "What's the reason?" She said, "Well, her oxygen saturation is only at 85%. So I thought, that doesn't make any sense. So I put the pulse ox that I had in the room on Grace's finger, and it read 95%. So I called her back in. I said, "Is this pulse ox reading accurate?" She said, "Yes, it is." I said, "Well, why is this meter reading 95% when your meter's reading 85%? And she said, "Well, because the leads get sweaty." I said, "Well, if that's a known, why aren't you proactively changing out the leads, given that this is the primary statistic you're using to manage my daughter's care?" And she shook her finger at me and said, "You should just be thankful you caught this." So these type of confrontations, I mean, I guess that's what you would call it. They were fairly regular. So anyway, I'm not going to drill those down because it takes away from the story. But ultimately, I called my wife. I called an attorney I know, and the attorney just suggested, "Scott, go without a fight," because her threat was, "I'm calling the Appleton Police Department if you don't leave." And ultimately, the armed guard walked me out to the truck. And so we go back to the story. So we got off track when I got taken out by the armed guard. So now we have 47 hours without an advocate in the room. And we had to hire an attorney. The attorney negotiated with the hospital attorney. Ultimately, my daughter, Jessica, became the replacement advocate. My wife, Cindy, couldn't do it because she was really sick. She had COVID too, or whatever. She had something. So she was.
So 47 hours it took them because they said, "You're just too irritating. We don't want you here, and we need a different person to be a patient advocate."
Correct.
That's basically what happened.
Correct. Well, during the 47 hours that nobody was there, they sedated Grace instead of taking care of her. So now she started on Precedex on October 9th. And if you read the package insert for Precedex, it says that if you use this drug for more than 24 hours, it causes acute respiratory failure. So now we go into the morning of Grace's last day on earth. She's on Precedex for 4 full days already.
And you didn't know because
We had
you went.
there's no informed consent.
And you, looking back at her chart, do you know why? Oh, it must be like they were saying maybe she was trying to pull out her tube and that kind of
They,
thing.
believe me, they lie. Grace was so content with the BiPAP mask on. They have notes in there. Yeah, she didn't pull anything. You know, they lie in records to justify actions. And I know people will have a hard time with that, but I mean, I'm not a dummy. And I was there. I mean, I saw them lie. They lie about oxygen. They lie about, when I was in the ER with Grace, they lied on the ER report from the doctor. They said, Grace is pulling off the cannula. She never touched the cannula. Down syndrome people have floppy ears. Okay. And so the cannula is falling off her ears. But
Okay, this is very hard though, Scott, because I know people who work in the ER, really nice people who work in
there
the
are
ER.
nice people that don't lie.
Why would they lie?
I, why does anybody lie? Yeah, their conscience has been seared. That's why people lie. Once when you get used to, if they don't care about the patient, they care about, they dictate a note, they're not paying attention, the cannula is falling off. Well, Grace, they just assume, they don't ask questions, they're passing judgment constantly. So they might not believe they're lying, but I mean, it's the equivalent of a lie, because they're choosing to not listen to, I'm telling them, the cannula is falling off because of Grace's ears. I'm telling them that. But then you read the chart and it says Grace pulls the cannula off. Well, that's a lie. They're not listening. They don't want to listen to a dumb dad.
This is the thing too. Like, I'm just thinking about myself, I'm thinking about myself going through medical school and residency and all these kinds of things. The biggest fear that you have is getting in trouble.
Well,
But
that's
someone's
right.
going to come back and blame you.
Standards of care, if they follow the standards of care, that is a get out of jail card free. So that's you don't get in trouble if you follow the standard of care. You start questioning the standard of care and start caring about the patient. So Grace ends up in a BiPAP mask the first night. That's ridiculous. Now that I understand what the real care should have been, and we have a medical expert on our team for the lawsuit. Grace should have never been on a BiPAP. But
she shouldn't have been on a BiPAP, meaning like when her O2 dropped.
She never needed a BiPAP. It was not even, but it's part of, if you look at, it's within the possibility that they can do. And remember, with COVID, I mean, this is so obvious with COVID. And when I tell you the details about how Grace died, and then we'll probably wrap up today.
Yeah.
You'll see this push for a ventilator. And a ventilator has about a $300,000 payday. And to get a ventilator set up, the patient has to be on Precedex, and they have to be justify it with low oxygen. So they have a vested interest in underreporting oxygen, and they have a vested interest in getting the patient on Precedex. So Precedex, you ask, what is it? It's a CNS depressant. Okay, so now she's on Precedex for 4 days. We turned the page into her last day. So now we're in October 13th. Jessica was in the room, my daughter, all night long with Grace. Her oxygen sat was 98 and 99% all night. So this is in spite of being on Precedex, which causes acute respiratory failure and hypoxemia. Okay. That's a direct, right out of the package insert for Precedex. That's what it says it causes if you use it for more than 24 hours. Grace still sat up in bed the night before, and you saw Grace's two nephews, Jessica's two sons, our grandkids, and she sat up in bed through that stupid BiPAP mask and waved at Jessica's boys and said, "Hi, boys," as loud as she could through that BiPAP. That was the night before she died. Okay. So now we turn the page into Grace's last day. The doctor had talked with Cindy and I the night before, and he said, I want you guys to consider giving us a pre-approval for a ventilator. Okay. This is the 4th time that was asked for us. He said, I'll call you tomorrow morning to see what you decided. Well, I already knew the numbers for a ventilator at this point. Okay, go ahead.
Why would they ask for that when she's not in respiratory distress? No, but
the love
what
of money
reason
is
do
the
they give
root of
you?
all sorts of evil.
What reason do they give you?
They said, so these are the exact words of the doctor. These types of things tend to happen in the middle of the night when we can't get a hold of the patient. So we want your pre-authorization for a ventilator.
But
Okay?
Jessica was going to be there.
I have seen so many cases. I'm a national figure now. People are contacting me all the time. So I see these cases. I see it. The ventilator, if we would have given them a pre-authorization for a ventilator, I can guarantee you 100% certainty Grace would not have died on October 13th. She would have died 22 days later. Why? Because that's the statistical average for somebody on a ventilator. The 90% kill rate, they keep them in the hospital for 22 days. Why? Because that's the maximum payout formula. This is not a joke.
22 days is the maximum payout? You mean like
yes, they
if
make
if it's longer, then they lose money on it. If it's
because
shorter,
there's you factor in the bonus payment with the insurance company they don't want that patient stay beyond X number of days.
and that's 22 days.
The 22 days is the average with COVID with somebody on a ventilator. So now this doctor calls Cindy and I the next morning, just like he said he was going to. And he says, what did you decide on the ventilator? And we said, we're not going to do a ventilator. Okay. He says then, Grace had such a good day yesterday, which we knew, Jessica's telling us, we should work on nutrition. So why do we need to work on nutrition? Because they wouldn't let me feed her. They wouldn't. So we should work on nutrition. Let's get her out of bed today. And so we get her bowels moving so she can get out of here in the next several days. This is the doctor telling us this on the phone. Okay?
That's great.
That sounds fantastic, doesn't it?
Yes.
Other than when you overlay the phone records with the charting and with what happened right before he got on the phone. Right, remember he said, let's get Grace out of bed today.
Yeah.
Before he got her on the phone, he ordered her strapped down to the bed and made her defecate in the bed. While we were on the phone, he increased the dose of Precedex to the maximum allowable dose while we were on the phone. Simultaneous with hanging up the phone, he put an illegal do not resuscitate order on her chart. So my suspicion is they knew, so you think, well, why did they kill her? And I said earlier, right, they killed her because she has Down syndrome. But what is the real reason they killed her that day? Because we would not approve a ventilator. And they knew we weren't going to approve a ventilator.
Why couldn't they just let her go home?
Well, no kidding. Why didn't I take her home when I left on October 10th? Well, because you trust that, you don't think that this is what's happening. Nobody would believe this story unless they believe me. And if they're into this, you see this, Grace's story is one of 1.2 million. I can tell you stories that are 10 times worse than Grace's, where these patients were in the hospital 40 days. They wouldn't let the parents in. I was on the phone with a mom today. They wouldn't let the mom in. When she got to see her daughter dead after 40 days, she didn't even recognize her.
Yeah, I believe that.
Her whole body is bruised, blown up. It's ridiculous. But they made $2 million off of that hospital stay. And her medical malpractice claim expires April 6th. They know this. They're all in on this. You can't sue
What are
these
you talking
people.
about? Medical
So
malpractice.
if she I told you we have a lawsuit. So medical malpractice, if you look, this was set up way before COVID. The state statutes do not allow you to sue these people. There's a statute of limitations for medical malpractice. So this girl I'm talking about died in New York State. The medical malpractice statute is 30 months. You have to file a claim within 30 months. Okay. Well, it takes you generally, I mean, you've got 6 months to get the records, it's 6 months to analyze them, and then you got to find an attorney. No attorneys take these cases on. Guess why? There's no money in them because the state statutes have a statutory limit on the money. So they can't make any money on these cases. So how do we have a case? We're funding our own case.
How much does it cost to fund your own case?
It's hard. It's beyond what people would even imagine. It's by the time we get the trial done, it'll be $750,000 to $850,000.
By the time you get what?
The trial, by the time the trial is scheduled.
So that won't be everything. It'll go beyond that probably too. Then you'll
they'll probably, assuming we win, they'll appeal. And I mean, it's ridiculous. So we're not doing it.
Aren't lawyers, other than incentivization and that kind of thing, aren't there fear tactics for lawyers? I would imagine that, because it seems like lawyers who are interested in these religious liberty, constitutional issues and that kind of thing, some of them are getting attacked themselves.
Well, they can be attacked themselves too. Yes. I mean, and they can be also corrupted. There's multiple things that happen there. I mean, the whole legal system is an antichrist system to boot. So we're not doing this to win money. We've already said if there's money damages, we're not even taking the money. We're doing this.
What is your lawsuit?
We're doing this to shed light on evil.
What is your lawsuit?
What, you say that again?
What is your lawsuit that you're bringing?
We have 5 claims. So we have wrongful death, medical malpractice, lack of informed consent, medical battery, and declaratory judgment for the illegal do not resuscitate order. The doctor puts the illegal do not, we hang up the phone at 10:55 a.m. October 13th. At 10:56, he puts a DNR order on Grace's chart. Okay. So the excuse, so I think plan B was already in place because we had already denied the ventilator 4 times before. So they knew we're going to deny the ventilator. So consequently plan B. So that's the DNR. Then what they did next was, there's a number of things in between, but we're going to speed ahead to 5:46 p.m. So now Grace is still on this max dose Precedex all day long. Multiple steps in between, but it doesn't add to why I'm calling Grace's death murder. Because we haven't got to that point. Why am I calling her death murder yet? So there's enough here, I'm sure you think, well, yeah, obvious, but no. 5:46, they combine Precedex with lorazepam, which is I have the sheet up here. Lorazepam is a benzodiazepine. So we have Precedex, max dose, 5:46, lorazepam, 5:49, another dose of lorazepam, and at 6:15 morphine. So that combination of meds is what got me to realize my daughter was murdered. And how I got there was a pharmacist called me after we started doing billboards. And she called me because her daughter has Down syndrome, and she was telling me, she's a pharmacist, and she called me. She's from another state, and she said, Scott, they murdered your daughter. I said, well, tell me why do you say that? She said, well, they're trying to get me to sign these orders. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, the process that to have Grace get these meds, the doctor had to order the meds, then the pharmacist has to sign off. Okay. So she said, how I've been doing it, I won't do it. She said, because I know it's going to kill somebody. So they wait until my shift is over. So they get a pharmacist with not the same kind of conscience that I have to sign the order. Okay. Then the alarm, because these meds, I have the morphine package insert up on my screen right now. These meds are contraindicated according to the morphine package insert. So there's an alarm that goes off. The alarm had to be overridden. And in Grace's case, the nurse who injected Grace had 20 years of ICU experience. That's the day I realized my daughter was murdered. So we have no idea now. So 6:15 happens. Jessica's in with Grace. She feels Grace's skin getting cold. So she's hollering for this 20
And when
year.
you say morphine is contraindicated in her situation, what do you mean? What
Those
about?
those three drugs are not supposed to be used together.
Okay.
Precedex, lorazepam, morphine.
Okay.
And if you use them together, you're supposed to directly monitor the patient and have the reversal drug bedside. Neither happened. Once Grace was given the morphine, no doctor or nurse stepped in her room. And when Jessica tried to get this nurse to come in, even just to take a temperature, the nurse said, that's normal that Grace is getting cold. That's normal. Cover her with a blanket. Strangely, at 6:43, at 6:15, they gave her the morphine. At 6:43, the doctor who ordered all these called Cindy and I at home telling us Grace had another good day. And he says, I just gave her morphine. I said, why did you give her morphine? Well, we wanted to slow her breathing down. So, I mean, we're still trusting the white coat. We don't know anything, right? So then Jessica now, she's with Grace, like I said, the whole time. At 7:18, she called us on a FaceTime call, panicking. She said, Dad, Grace's numbers are dropping like crazy. I said, get the nurses in. She said, they won't come in. I've been trying. So now we're on this FaceTime call screaming, save our daughter. This is when we learned she was DNR, because from outside the room, they scream back, she's DNR. So we holler, she's not DNR, save our daughter. And they refused. And we watched her die on that FaceTime call at 7:27 p.m. on October 13th of 2021. So now I want to peel back something. I know you're probably in shock when I tell you these details, but this is literally what happened. I put together this timeline because it's easier to see than having, 1,200 pages of medical records. But now the medical records have been gone through with a fine tooth comb for the lawsuit, because you have to have everything stamped and ready for trial. And, it's so plainly obvious that this cannot be an accident.
And Jessica was there this whole time when they were giving her the Precedex and the lorazepam and
And the
the
morphine. Yeah.
morphine. And did she know that they were giving her sister more and more of these tranquilizing type of medications?
No idea. And the only time she knew anything is when the doctor said, I want to slow your sister's breathing down. So I'm going to give her morphine. They never ask you anything. They just do it.
Mhm.
Well, here, now we see what's going on, and you can see the nefarious sequence of events. But it's even worse than that. So I want to show one more document before I close.
Okay.
So you think, how is it possible a doctor could put an illegal do not resuscitate order on somebody? In a medical situation, a do not resuscitate order is probably the most important document you could ever sign. So just intuitively, if you just think about it, you would think, well, of course I've got to, that can't be something they can just do. They've got to get my permission and I must have to sign something. And if you read the state statute, and this is in every state, you'll see it's clear. It lays it right out that, yeah, there's a protocol for a do not resuscitate order. Well, I filed a complaint with the Department of Safety and Professional Services, which is the state licensing board. And this is what they wrote back. They said Chapter 154 of the Wisconsin statutes does not apply to physicians operating in a hospital, non-emergency room setting, such as the one in question. I'd like the phrase, you can't make this up, because it applies to so many things, but you cannot make this up. So that what they're telling you is a doctor can unilaterally put a DNR on anybody he wants as long as it's in a hospital non-emergency room setting. Are you kidding me? This is why you need an advocate when you go in a hospital. And your chart, you've got to have electronic access to your chart from your laptop or phone the entire time, because they don't tell you what they're doing even though you demand it. So you've got to see what they're doing electronically. You cannot leave it to chance. This is not a joke.
What is Chapter 154?
That's the DNR statute for Wisconsin.
That I'm looking at here. No person except an attending physician may issue a do not resuscitate order. They may issue a do not resuscitate order to a patient only if the patient is a qualified patient, the patient requests the order, the patient consents to the order, the patient signs the order.
Yeah, so I mean, you can see it's just the way it should be. It's logical. But they're saying their own licensing board said it doesn't apply.
Because the physician should be able to exercise their own judgment.
Yes.
And it's informed by many variables, including but not limited to the patient prognosis, expected medical benefit, and the family's wishes. Okay, that's very, to say the least, that's very educational that there is this. Okay, please proceed.
All right, so I want to just close with one slide here, Joyce, because this is the single statistic that really opened my eyes. So, as first your daughter's gone, the hospital CEO and doctor refused to meet with me, which I thought that's strange, because at that time, I was just taking my biblical responsibility seriously. I didn't know, right now I call Grace's death murder, and you can see why I call it murder. But at that time, I just thought she died, and they goofed up. And so I thought, well, we've got all the records sized up. Let's just meet so they can see how they goofed up, so history doesn't repeat itself. Well, they refused to meet. And, through a series of events that God orchestrated, all of a sudden, I'm waking up to, there's a bigger picture going on here. And so I'm going to just give you this statistic slide. This one really got me to drill down what is going on. So when you look at the deaths in hospitals with COVID, the United States was number one of all countries in the world. Number one, 1.2 million hospital deaths. So how is that possible? We're supposed to be the best country on the planet relative to medical care, but we have the highest number of hospital deaths? That doesn't make any sense. And India, whose population is 4 times that of the United States, has less than 50%, and they're number 2. So you think, what's going on? And this is what I want to leave you with, this scripture, because I think God warned us ahead of time. He said, for your merchants were the most important people of the earth. And I think he's talking about the United States, because with your pharmakia, they deceived all nations. And my opinion is we are in the last days, and Satan has got an all-court press to unleash evil in the world, and the United States had to lead the charge, and they did. So this opened my eyes to a lot bigger picture. We're talking mainly about the COVID era here, but it's substantially bigger than that. And I'll just give you kind of a teaser slide for where are things going? And you see that this is a my chart from Ascension, Wisconsin. What's happening is the in the old way that we would everybody would have viewed the world is that we have this thing called the rule of law. Everybody's got to operate by the rule books. We have a different opinions of things, but we all have to operate by the rule books. Well, now the rule books are thrown out the window, and people, doctors, hospital systems, they're doing whatever they want. And here's an example. So happens to be the same hospital system that Grace was killed in. They are the largest Catholic hospital system in the United States. So they made a policy decision that when a child, they call the child a patient, turns 12, parents have no rights to their chart anymore. The child is an adult in their system. So
this is currently the case at this hospital and maybe other hospitals, that
correct.
children by the age of 12, they are no longer considered children. They can make their own medical decisions.
Exactly. That's exactly right. There's so many, I've been on a number of shows where this is the hosts are very aware of this, that this is the push nationwide to have kids be treated as adults. So it should be no shock if people are into this, but I mean, I'm showing it as a slide so that you're prepared as an adult. So what would be my recommendation? I'll end with that. Yeah, I've already shared my recommendation relative to being prepared for a hospital stay, but my very strong recommendation is eliminate medical insurance. Do not have medical insurance any longer. And that sounds completely off base. I understand, because we've been programmed that you got to have medical insurance. Well, there's alternatives. We actually were under Christian Healthcare Ministries up until 2 weeks ago. I canceled that because I found out they were in on it also. They would only pay out for allopathic or conventional medicine choices. And I don't want to be in the conventional medical system. If I have a broken leg or, my arm falls off, yeah, I'll go to the hospital. But other than that, I'm not going. I want to do everything outside of that system. So we ended up, we were going to go with nothing because we found out we're paying $600 a month for nothing. But anyway, somebody referred us to Samaritan Ministries, and I checked them out, and they hit the mark. So we signed up with them. So that's what we have
Oh,
now.
that's good to know. Samaritan Ministries, that's like a kind of a health coverage type of thing. It probably works so that people are putting money into a pot and then distributing it
Right.
as people get
As the
sick.
needs come in, but they cover the things that, so if we get cancer, we're not going to do chemo and radiation. Cancer's already been cured, but people aren't aware of it. So they cover that stuff. So
Well, that's very helpful to know. I know that you have to go, so I'm gonna keep this really quick, but you know, I just want to clarify here, because I think some of the things that you have shared here are going to be totally shocking for people. And there are many people who are not, their emotions are going to kick in and cause them to really, really be skeptical of some of the things that you are simply saying, as like, this is the way that it is. This is the way that the world is working. And so I hope that people will at least be open to thinking about this. Your lawsuit right now, you're saying it's the first lawsuit that anyone has made in this capacity. I mean, what do you mean by that?
yep,
Nobody.
that's a great question. Well, we have the first jury trial for one, but we have what happened is, through the process of the lawsuit, we ended up filing what's called a common law medical battery claim. And this will show you how anti-Christ the legal system is. So we had, lack of informed consent. That's really a big claim. but lack of informed consent goes underneath. It's subsumed under medical malpractice in most states. Well, that's not right. Medical malpractice means negligence. It was a mistake. Okay. We're talking about crossing the line with intentional. All right. So intentional versus mistake. Well, we don't want this to be about a mistake. We want to expose the evil that is going on. And so through the process of filing the claim and then the motions to dismiss, ultimately we have a common law battery claim, which, assuming that we win that, it opens the door for people to not be restricted with the state statutes. So I'll just be very blunt. The state statute in Wisconsin limits, assuming that we would win the medical malpractice claim, the maximum payout is $750,000. So you just process that. So 750,000 is nothing. The cost to do Grace's trial for Grace's case is about 800,000. That's the cost. So you can't have a payout at 750. No one's going to take the case, right? So what happens if you have a common law claim? It takes it outside of the statutory limit. So then you have the potential for attorneys to take cases on a percentage versus, paying your own way. So that's why it's a huge case. It's a precedent setting case nationally.
It's a common law battery claim.
Correct.
Against. And so this is just, I just have to clarify with people is that, we want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, right? And when you see these doctors, you said that when you see them, you are going to, you are making this claim for their souls and their salvation as much as anybody else, because we want to hold people accountable. But there's just so much about this that is so questionable. And so we really do need to examine this very thoroughly for grace's sake, as well as for the sake of just the search for truth. And I do want to share with someone, I was talking with another lawyer friend, and she was saying that there has been a shift in analysis, in that when we are looking for this, I think she called it juridical analysis, that rather than there being a search for truth, there is this consideration of like, what is the risk harm? And so we are not in search of truth anymore. I think people have to be educated and informed that truth is not what people are seeking as much as, like in the case of the last 4 years, it was safety and efficacy based upon certain parameters that people were creating, it seemed, on their own. And so we want to be searching for truth, and remember, this is God's truth. That's truth. Science will catch up. And
Yeah, exactly. Science is not the truth, but if science is in pursuit of the truth, they will catch up to the truth. That's right. Very well said, Joyce.
So, I'm going to share with people a little bit more. Maybe I will look into how I can, let people know a little bit more. Maybe you can share with them about your website.
Yeah, so the link to the complaint and so against the hospital, the doctors, nurses, that's all on Grace's website. The website is ouramazinggrace.net. That's the main website. On that website, you'll see I've got tons of research. First, there's pictures and videos of Grace, so you got to spend some time on the website. But then I have tons of research about this whole system of how it was created and where it's gone. And then I just finished up last week a series called The Matrix Revealed, and that's linked on Grace's website. But then if you want to follow our story, you can do that one of two ways. One is in the upper right hand corner of that website, there's a link to our Substack. So we do regular Substack updates. And then if you want to just follow the legal case, we have another website, graceschara.com. And that website, when you go there, there's a link to our Give, Send, Go also there. But that website is a landing page that has a little bit of information. My daughter Jessica maintains that page, but what she's doing with that is she's capturing if you enter in your name and email, that allows us to build a database so that as we have calls to action, we can reach out to people directly who are following.
Okay. And before we close, I do want to clarify one thing and just make people aware. Sometimes people tend to say, oh, all doctors are evil and they're all working with, pharmaceuticals and this kind of thing. I have not found that to be the case. I think that uh, most of our doctors just don't know. And and most people go into medicine and healthcare because they want to do good. But there is a reason why incentives work. You know, we're human, and human nature is that you will make excuses and you'll rationalize things
Correct.
many times based upon how it benefits you. And we are all at risk of that. And so I don't think that we're necessarily saying we are better than other people or anything like that. I think that the majority of people who are working in medicine and whatever healthcare practices, business, all these things. Most people, you know, there's it's a slippery slope. People do it one decision at a time, one bad judgment at a time, and we're all at risk of that. So I very much sympathize with this, but I do ask that those of my friends who are in the medical field that they would consider that these things are happening, possibly happening in your case as well. I mean, this is very, very concerning, and it's something that we as physicians should not be so quick to say, "Oh, that's a rarity. That can't be what it is." I think that we need to be open-minded enough to look into it and say, "Is this a possibility? Is it possible that finances are and incentives are possibly going to change the way that I think and what I think is right or wrong?"
And the
That's a
incentives
salvation
can,
issue.
yeah, you're right on. I think you summed that up perfectly, Joyce. The incentives aren't necessarily direct. So in the case of my research, the hospital system that Grace died at, they received 10 billion in government incentive payments in the first year of COVID. 10 billion. All right, so the doctor didn't receive 10 billion, but the doctor, if they don't follow the standards of care, right? So the standards of care, if the standards of care are flawed, but they've got to follow the standards of care to maintain their license. Okay,
Yes.
so now you start. Okay, so there's many lines here, but ultimately, I do want to come back to what you said. I mean, our goal with the lawsuit is if the doctors and nurses who were involved with Grace's death repent, we won, and
Yes.
that's number one.
Yes.
I know I do have to get going, but Joyce, this is really it's great to see you again, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much. I'll let you go. God
All
bless
right,
you.
all right,
Okay.
bye.
Bye-bye. Our hearts go out to Scott Schara and his family. And if you would like to learn more information, you can go to his website, ouramazinggrace.org, and they have a Give Send Go. And you can learn more about that. It is The Sky is the Limit. We Seventh-day Adventists have an amazing health message. We were called to treat disease using altogether new methods. And it says in the writings of Mrs. White, she says that God would go before his people in doing this work. We were to reform medical practice. It's an amazing calling. And I wonder, it's not too late. It's not too late for us to set about to fulfill that calling. We are going to start a new Med Missionary program. It's an online course. Well, it's not a new online course. We've been here for about 3 years now, but we're starting a new class. We run for about 2 months at a time with each course, and we're starting May the 12th. May the 12th. And so, if God is calling upon you to learn about natural ways that reflect the character of God in healing. Please do join us. We are at medmissionary.com, medmissionary.com. We're very serious about helping people through these last days. We help people learn natural remedies. I remember that, we used to organize all-night prayer meetings during this time. And uh, at the end of the prayer time, I remember hearing testimonies. People would say, I'm immune compromised. I have kidney failure, but I was convicted that I could do this using God's ways. And I made it through just fine. And, just to hear these stories of the faith that people are having in the Word of God, trusting their lives into His hands, it was just is a beautiful thing. And so I just pray that if God puts it upon your heart, join us. May 12th, we're going to start. Go to medmissionary.com to learn more information and to register. You have to register. Okay, God bless you all. We will see you again next Sabbath then. Take care.